and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, and this is officially my first time hosting this podcast this semester. I'm very excited to have this role as the podcast host for not only the show but for the network. I'm going to try my best to bring you guys all the best content, best discussion, and best just overall football talk over the period that I am the football host of the show. But that being said, let's talk about some football. I have some exciting segments for you guys here today. After now that we're officially into the off season, the NFL off season, there's going to be a lot of talking points that I want to get to over the course of these episodes. And the first segment, I kind of want to start doing a different thing, my own little segment that I can have each and every show, call out the chip shot segments or the chip shots of the day, where basically I'll be bringing you guys stories, football related stories about players, coaches, or anything that's connected to football but off the field, away from games, results, and anything like that. You know, stuff off the field, activities, news that some players might get into. Because I think it's just fun to talk about. It's entertaining to see what these guys get into off the field, away from the game. It's not all about winning, losing, stats, records, and stuff like that. So that's one segment I'm always going to have to try to reoccur, bring you guys something new, exciting to talk about. Later on in the show, I'll be bringing up some of the teams that I think and that I saw on ESPN. They were talking about the teams that are under the most pressure to win this off season, and I'll be giving my thoughts on their list and my thoughts on some changes that I thought could have been made to that list. So that'll be the second segment. After that, after the halfway point of the show, I'll be talking about Tua Tagovailoa and his contract heading into next year, what it looks like for him, what kind of contract he could be getting, and how could it affect the Dolphins roster going forward, because they have a good amount of free agents and important free agents that they need to really decide how they're going to spend this money and what's best for them going forward. And to wrap it all up later in the show, I'm going to talk about the Cowboys and them being all in this coming season. Those were exact words from owner and general manager Jerry Jones. He had those quotes at the Senior Bowl this season, this offseason I should say. And I want to talk about what that means, the narrative surrounding that, and how this offseason is potentially one of the biggest ones we've seen in recent Cowboys history because of the contracts, the players that are there, and the decisions that are probably going to ultimately be made after the season, if it all goes good, bad, or any other way. So those are all the segments I'm going to talk about. I'm going to jump into the first one, but before I do that, I want to ask you guys to please look at the graphic I have up there, and I want to remind you guys to please like and follow the show. We get a lot of questions from viewers during the show, so to make sure that your question is seen, please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker down below me with any question that you may have. The tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. This just makes sure your question gets put to the top of the list. Make sure I'm able to see it and read it right away when it comes up. And it's also just a big help for not only the show, but the network and everybody here. So I greatly appreciate if you guys could do that for me with any of your questions. So that being said, now I can officially jump into the first segment of today's show, the Chip Shots segment of the show. And some interesting stories I thought I would discuss with everyone watching here is obviously the event that's going to occur in about or less than half an hour now, Eastern time at 7 o'clock is the first event of the NBA All-Stars game. First event, the Celebrity All-Stars game. There's a lot of well-known celebrities, but the ones I want to talk about are Micah Parsons, CJ Stroud, and Miko Hardman, Puka Nacua, some of the NFL guys that are going to actually be playing in this NBA All-Stars game. When I first saw the list, I it was initially just Micah Parsons and C.J. Stroud competing in the game, but after a while, I think just a few days ago, Miko Hardman announced that he was going to be playing in the game, so he got added, and then Puka Nakua was actually on the Pat McAfee show, and Pat asked him about the NBA All-Star Celebrity Game, and Puka said he'd love to. He actually nailed a shot there while he was live on the air, and then he got added to the rosters. So that's going to be exciting to see. I only know from just researching it prior to this episode that Miko Hardman is on Stephen A's team as one of the coaches. Stephen A, the other coach is Shannon Sharp. I know that Miko Hardman is on Stephen A's team. I couldn't find what team Puka Nakua was going to be on, but would assume it would be Shannon Sharp's team. But that being said, it's going to be an exciting thing just because I don't know if a lot of you guys have been paying attention to just podcasts, sports media in general. Micah Parsons has his own podcast. He actually had C.J. Stroud on there, and they had some good banter between both of them, saying how, just trash talking each other, talking about the game. And Micah, like I'm sure most of you have seen, has been talking about him being extremely good at basketball. But CJ comes back and says how he played basketball in high school, and I thought it was so funny that he brought up one performance that he had against Miami Heat rookie forward Jaime Hawkins Jr. in high school, and how he dropped 40 on him in that game, and how everybody went crazy. He hit a game-winning shot there at the end of that game, and he said he dropped 40 points on him, and everybody rushed the court and stuff like that. And that got me like thinking that CJ Stroud, all right, he thinks he's good at basketball. That's one thing. And then I've seen him recently in Travis Scott's HBCU celebrity baseball or softball game that happened recently, and he did pretty well on it. The guy's just a natural athlete. From what I see, he's not only great at football, but just seeing him do all this other stuff, he just looks like a great athlete, and that's why I won't be able to catch the whole game, obviously, because I'll be live here. But my predictions for that game, I expect it to be very entertaining for not only the players on the court, but there's always stuff that happens off the court. They're gonna have different events there as well. The game's actually gonna be played on the new LED innovative court, which carries a lot of different animations, and I'm sure different like celebrations for the any player that hits a three, gets a dunk or something, makes a big play in the game. It's gonna be pretty cool to see because it's the first time they're trying this new LED court out in a game like this. They're gonna have other events as well, other Ruffles based events during the game, so that's gonna add to the ambiance of the game. I mentioned which team some of the players were on. Stephen A's team also has Meta World Peace on it, on top of CJ Stroud, Miko Hardman, and I wrote somebody else, and I think those were the biggest names I remembered. So I think it's going to be a very entertaining game, and if I were to pick a winner just based on the rosters, I think I would have to go with Stephen A's team, just because Stephen A's done it before. He's taken it very seriously, I think, and it's kind of funny that I saw today that he actually, it's not funny that he got hurt, but he got hurt actually playing Micah Parsons one-on-one during the court. They might have been shooting around. I don't know how intense this one-on-one was, but he actually hurt his ankle and was taken to the hospital to get evaluated for that ankle. He's okay to coach, though, in tonight's game, but it looks like he's taking it very seriously from last year. I'm pretty sure he lost, so I think he's coming back with a vengeance. He's got some good players on their team. Most of all, CJ Stroud. I keep mentioning him because I just think he's going to just show out today and show everyone how great of an athlete he is. He's my vote for MVP. I think they're going to take it by a good amount, honestly. I know there's other players like Kai Cenat, a streamer on that team. So it's going to be very entertaining. But I am ultimately taking Stephen A's team to win, and CJ Stroud is my pick for the MVP. The other story I wanted to bring up quickly during this segment is some recent quotes I saw from Jordan Mailata that ties into a bigger theme that I want to get into. Just this offseason has really been surrounded or these playoffs, I should say, were really surrounded around a couple of things. The Chiefs and where they were going to make it back to the Super Bowl. The 49ers as well. Could they finally get it done with Brock Purdy, obviously? The Lions making it that far to the NFC Championship. The Bills, could they finally do it with home field advantage against the Chiefs? But the two biggest ones that kind of developed late were obviously all the news and hype around Taylor Swift being at the games and everything, and Travis Kelce playing better while she's there. They always had the camera up there, like I'm sure everybody knows, doesn't need me to bring it up again. But over the course of the playoffs, Jason Kelce, obviously the Eagles got eliminated in the first round, so he joined in the games, the antics of the celebrations during the games, and it was just funny because it was all over social media that Jason Kelce and what he was doing at the Bills game, jumping in with the crowd, had his shirt off, drinking beers and everything with the fans outside before the game. Then you see him up in the suite in the Super Bowl and just everything else. I don't have to mention too much about the Super Bowl celebrations that I'm sure everyone saw, them at the after parties and everything, Jason Kelce having the time of his life. And they asked his O-line teammate Jordan Mailata about his retirement because there was a lot of speculation that he would be retiring, but he didn't officially announce it. So Jordan Mailata, his quotes were when they asked him about, do you think Jason Kelce will come back? He said, "There's no shot. You're telling me how he's going shirts off in games, gambling in casinos. He's coming back? No way. He's having too much fun." And you could kind of see that to some aspect. Even though he hasn't announced anything, Jason Kelce, I think I've seen him more than ever now be more of a media, more of a personality. He's shown everyone his personality and not a lot more, not just because he has his own podcast with his brother, a very successful podcast, but I think he's going on other podcasts now. He's having fun at the Pro Bowl with his kids, his wife, the Super Bowl parties and everything, and just getting or showing everyone the personalities that he has, his family has. I'm sure everyone's seen the clips of his daughters as well, him and his daughters. His wife, Kylie Kelce, has also become very like a famous celebrity in some aspects with NFL fans and everyone that follows her podcast, follows the Kelces. And I just think it's funny how how everyone's just noticing this about Jason Kelce, how much of a character he is, because you don't see it too much on the field, right? Because he's only the center of the Eagles. There's not too much flashiness that comes with that position. But now, seeing all these stuff, everyone kind of, he's become like America's sweetheart now in a sense, right? Everyone loves him. Everyone loves seeing him at the games, seeing him off the field, seeing him what kind of activities he's been involved in. Like I mentioned, he's been going on podcasts. He was on the Shaq podcast and talked about a story when him and his brother Travis Kelce obviously grew up in a house, always competing, and he told a funny story about how they actually got into a fight, a pretty serious one while they were playing basketball, and they almost like hurt their dad when he was trying to separate them. So those kind of funny, relatable stories as that he can provide is something that I think has kind of grown him into something that he probably wasn't expecting, to be honestly, just because of the way he seems to not care about everybody else's opinion. But it just gets me thinking, he's so prominent in these roles now in media, and he's always on social media with his podcast and everything. Could he have a career in TV somehow, some way? He already got the podcast, and I'm sure he's going to get offers for TV in the near future if he does decide to retire. So that was the interesting part about that surrounding Jason Kelce and that story. It was funny how they asked Jordan Mailata about it and how he's kind of accepting the fact that he's never seen Jason Kelce like this, so happy off the field and really living his best life. So I just thought I'd talk about that. And for this segment, I'm always going to try to have 2, potentially 3 stories to talk about, but today I only had 2 for this episode, so that'll wrap it up for the first segment. I'm going to go to a quick break here for a few minutes, and I'll be back with the second segment where I'll talk about which teams are under the most pressure heading into this offseason and who really needs to win this offseason to have a good regular season and season overall. So Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, continuing on this first episode as me as the host. In the first segment, we talked about the Chip Shot segment, just bringing up stories of players, coaches, personalities off the field, unrelated to games and scores and results and teams like that. I brought up Jason Kelsey and his off-the-field antics, how he's really grown into this personality that everybody loves, as well as bringing up the NBA Celebrity All-Star Game that's going to kick off NBA All-Star Weekend that starts today at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Michael Parsons participating, C.J. Stroud participating, and Miko Harmon and Puka Nacua late additions to that. So I talked about that, my thoughts, who I think is going to win, the MVP. So that was the first segment. Now I can move on to the second segment, which is which teams are under the most pressure to win this offseason, right? The offseason's already firing. There's some key dates heading, or coming up, I should say, in the calendar. Just March 5th, I think, is the last day in the calendar year to sign new players, or sign players to new contracts, I should have said. And then after that, you can't negotiate anymore, and you have a risk of potentially letting them hit free agency. But the teams that are under the most pressure to win this offseason. I was watching ESPN a few days ago, and I saw that Mike Greenberg, the host of Get Up on the weekdays, had his own list, and I wanted to bring it up here and talk about it, give my thoughts on it, and see what kind of reasoning he had behind it. So his top 5 teams that he thought needed to win this offseason, or were under the most pressure to win, get it right this offseason, were at 5 were the Buffalo Bills. Number 4 were the Dallas Cowboys. Number 3 were the Pittsburgh Steelers. And number 2 were his New York Jets. And number 1, the Chicago Bears. So just initially from that list, he gave a few reasons that I wrote down as well. So I remembered, starting with the Bills. The Bills, there's a lot of talks of their Super Bowl window potentially closing. They have some pieces on the defensive side of the ball that could be hitting free agency that were injured, and now they need to get them back, or they need to re-sign them to new deals. Obviously, this past season they had a lot of injuries: Tre'Davious White, Mike Milano, and just in the playoffs as well, some other corners got hurt, and linebackers, just all over their defensive side of the ball. It looked like they were missing pieces. Offensively too, Gabe Davis missed the game against the Steelers and didn't play against the Kansas City Chiefs as well. So they were just missing pieces. They obviously didn't get it done. Everybody had them more of the favorites than any other time, just because they had that home field advantage. Everyone kind of had it as a foregone conclusion that they were going to face the Chiefs this time in Buffalo. And there was a lot of unfortunate circumstances. Obviously, the missed kick there by Tyler Bass pretty much sealed it, and was a devastating way for them to lose. But I thought, in my estimation, that was a good team to have on there. I probably would have had them on there, but just because of that reason, that their Super Bowl window does seem to be closing in some aspects, but a lot of people, and I would probably agree with this group, thinking that as long as you have Josh Allen, you have a chance. You know, that window is only as open as long as he's there. And I think he's proven to be that kind of caliber quarterback to duel with Patrick Mahomes a lot in the playoffs and in the regular season. Yeah, he hasn't come out on the winning side, but he I don't think you can name any other quarterbacks that have taken it toe to toe and have really made you think that wow, this guy's about to be Patrick Mahomes and knock the Chiefs out of the playoffs. It's only been Joe Burrow and Tom Brady that have beaten him in the playoffs. So I think Josh has the talent to do so. They're just missing those pieces, those key moments to really capitalize on their moment if they were to face off again. But I do agree with the Bills. I do agree with the Cowboys just because, again, they're going to be in the playoffs just because their conference overall is a lot weaker in my estimation than the AFC. In the AFC, they have a lot more top 10, top tier quarterbacks. And in the NFC, I think there's less experience in the NFC with these playoff games. And there's also younger coaches in the NFC that don't have the years of experience that some do in the AFC, like a John Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick, um, McDermott now, and I know I'm missing one. Oh, Andy Reid, obviously, I guess. You could add him onto to that list as well. There's a lot more experience, a lot more years of trial and error on the AFC, where in the NFC, some of the top tier teams like the Lions, the Packers have LaFleur, Dan Campbell as well, a young coach. Really, you could say the most experienced one in the AFC, unless I'm missing someone. Um, Probably Pete Carroll. He's been with Seattle for as long as I can remember. And then everybody else hasn't really stuck around too much. There's a lot of younger, new age coaches in the NFC that are trying to establish their legacy. But the Cowboys have one of those more experienced coaches, Mike McCarthy, but not to the level of success that those other coaches are, right? Pete Carroll's won a Super Bowl. Mike McCarthy has one with the Packers, but with the Cowboys, it's been nothing close to whatever he had with the Packers. Obviously, they had Aaron Rodgers in the prime of his years, but the Cowboys have just as talented, if not more talented, roster overall than the Packers did in those years. So, Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys, this offseason is going to be huge for them because they do have a lot of other free agents that I'm going to get into in the last segment of the show. But just the general thought around them is they're going to be in the playoff, but what are they going to do? Yeah, they made it past the first round this year. Actually, no, they didn't. They actually didn't make it past the first round. They lost to the Packers. But it always seems like the regular season, they kind of up their levels a little bit in the regular season. 2 years ago, they were good. Now, this past year, it looked like they were even better because of CeeDee Lamb, his breakout year. The defense was just as good. And they just had all these players. Stephon Gilmore added to that defense when Trayvon Diggs went down. Defensively, they were just as strong, if not better. And offensively, you could have said they were better as well with Ferguson now being added to the group. He was very reliable for Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb, like I mentioned. Tony Pollard struggled in some aspects, but he's still a middle to top tier running back that the Cowboys had. So they have everything. In the regular season, they look great and all, but then afterwards, in the playoffs, it comes down to that quarterback, man. Like, honestly, if you don't have someone that has that it factor, that special factor to them, it's gonna become really old for the fan bases, for the organization when it looks like you're right there, you have the game or you should win, and then they have a performance like the Cowboys did, which it seems unfathomable because of the talent that they had. Jordan Love was making his playoff debut on the road, and it just all anything that could have went wrong for the Cowboys. Dak, I think, is finally at that point with most of the fan base. Not all of them. There are still some that believe in him, but I think with most of them, they're kind of thinking this kid was supposed to come in and bring something that Tony Romo couldn't in all his years as the Cowboys starter. And I think Dak hasn't really done that to any estimation. If anything, he's kind of, you could argue he's done a little bit worse than him in the playoffs because with Tony they made it further past the first round. in those games against the most famous one against the Packers with the Dez catch and all. Um, but Dak Prescott is, if he's giving you the same as Tony Romo, then most fans are going to think, what are we doing here? Why is this still okay to happen? Why haven't we changed them? And I'll get into that a little bit more later on when I talk about Jerry Jones's comments. But the Cowboys were always going to be there. The Steelers was the place in the list that I tended to disagree with, just because I think there's one team that, for me, is under a little bit more pressure. Because with the Steelers, the way I look at it is, I just mentioned that quarterback, and everybody needs that. And I mentioned that in any team in the NFL, but especially in the AFC, with everyone seemingly to get better. The Chargers are most likely going to get better with Jim Harbaugh there. The Bengals are going to have Joe Burrow healthy, not injured the whole time. The Browns look legit, and we're going to have to see how Deshaun Watson looks. But if he comes back, plays just as good as Joe Flacco, they're going to make it far. You saw how they made it to the playoffs. And then just on top of that, the Ravens are still the Ravens. Yeah, they might have a lot of free agents, but you still expect them to compete. Whereas the Steelers, I think they're still in a tough spot where there's still some hope for Kenny Pickett, but he's just gotten injured a lot for me. In some games, he's looked pretty well. He's competed, but in other games, it just looks like the offense is still struggling. He's not really making a difference as much as people would have hoped. And a lot of it was thrown on to Matt Canada, but once he was gone, it still looked on and off. He got hurt again with the ankle. Then Mason Rudolph came on, and they actually looked better in that aspect with Mason Rudolph, with a change, with a bit more risk-taking and stuff like that. So I think they're just a step away from this being the season, the off season where they need to get it right, because I still believe they're going to have a average to below average quarterback. So nothing in this off season, I think, gives me a thought that they're going to change that and that they need to win this off season to have a good regular season. If they get Justin Fields, I know that's a rumor that's going on a lot, but I don't know. I think other than that, it just seems like they're not going to get a prominent quarterback to thrust them into that role. So that's why I don't agree with that. And I wanted to put the Eagles in there just because they look so dominant in the regular season to start this past season, and the season they made it to the Super Bowl. They had great coordinators. They made it to the Super Bowl, like I mentioned, and Jalen Hurts went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes, and it was just a penalty, a sack fumble that kind of cost them that game. But you had the hope coming into this season that they basically had the same team, same players on the defense, offense, but it just looked rough, especially towards the end of the season where they lost 5 out of their last 6 games to some pretty bad teams like the Giants, with all due respect, because of the record that they had at that point of the season. They lost to the Cardinals, they lost to the Cowboys, the Seahawks as well, and it just didn't look good. And a lot of people want to put it on their coordinators, and that, to me, just strengthens my point, because I think this offseason, they got rid of those coordinators from this past season, and now they have to get it right, because that's seemingly only the only issue, right? Because the offense just looked like it didn't know what it was doing. It was calling some questionable calls at not the right points of the game. So the Eagles, I think, are just good hires away from being from being that team again that we saw 2 seasons ago, because they have all the pieces. I know Jason Kelce might retire. Some of the guys are getting older, but they did a good job, or they always do a good job with Howie Roseman of resupplying through the draft, making trades if they have to, not being afraid to pull the trigger on some things to improve their team overall. So if they continue that trend, I think they're just good coordinators away from competing once again, and they need to get that right. The pressure is on them to get it right this offseason, because if they do, they're going to be right back in that picture in a weaker NFC, with competing with the Niners and the Lions that are now a prominent threat, as well as the Packers that looks legit with Jordan Love. So I think that, to me, gives them more pressure to get those hires right, because if not, they're going to be pretty bad, or more of the same this season if they lose Jason Kelce. But if they get those right, they're going to have a great regular season, in my opinion. After that, I agree with the next two being the Jets, because The Jets, again, if they fix that O line and if Aaron Rodgers can get hurt in a freak accident like he did, rupturing his Achilles the first week, the first drive as a Jet, um, they could really compete in at least in the division because everyone saw Zach Wilson play and the off the field distractions and storylines that were coming out about him. You're not going to get that with Aaron Rodgers because he's been there, he's done it. He's an established veteran that could get you to where everybody believes they can get with this roster. They have good young talent. Sauce Gardner, Quincy Williams, his brother on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall looks like a great running back. They're just missing that X factor, that quarterback, and the O line because Aaron Rodgers, I'm sure everyone saw that he was during the preseason last year. There was a lot of talk of that O line. It still wasn't fixed, and now they have a good opportunity to do that through the draft. And if they can do that and hit on those offensive line weak links in the offensive line, I think they can have a great team, a great roster with a difference maker like Aaron Rodgers coming in and finally fulfilling that potential that everyone saw in them last offseason. And obviously, the Bears, there's not much need to be said there. They hold the first overall pick. They could get a generational talent, like everyone likes to call him, Caleb Williams. I have him as the best quarterback in this draft, but I'm sure other people see it a lot closer. But to me, he's electric. He's creative. He's not afraid to take risk and run outside the quarterback box and make plays, extend drives, and I think that makes him special. And it's hard to pass up on a guy like that because of the hindsight of saying no to him, and then he goes on to be, a Patrick Mahomes of that caliber. So the Bears, I think, are going to cave to that speculation, and then you have to wait to see what they get with Justin Fields, what kind of haul they get, and if they do get a good haul for Justin Fields, they could have a great offseason this year and compete in that NFC North with the Packers kind of elevating themselves this past season, but the Vikings, you don't know where they're going to be with their quarterback situation, and then it's the Bears and then the Lions. How are they going to deal with all the hype and expectations that are now put on them? So I think the Bears have a good opportunity to do that, to restock, find their franchise, and get that, live up to that pressure and produce something special out of it. And I think they could get a lot of special moments with Caleb Williams being their quarterback. So they got to get that right. Obviously, the draft's going to be a huge point in that. But if they get it right, I think there could be a lot more success than there is skepticism, like it's been surrounding them these past few years with their quarterback. So that's what I think on that topic. On that was brought up on Get Up. The teams under the most pressure. My one change there was the Eagles going in for the Steelers. But let me know what you guys think in the live chat or any comments and engagement that you guys want to afterwards whenever you view this episode. But it is time for another quick break here. Halfway through the show now. I'll be back after a quick break there and talk about Tua Tagovailoa's contract situation. So don't go anywhere. We're going to go to another break, and on the other side, we're going to take a deep dive into the contract situation with Tua and the Dolphins. So don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back here for the third segment of the show. I mentioned before that we were going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa and his contract situation, how really pivotal it could be for the Dolphins this offseason. But before that, I wanted to remind you guys one more time, like I did at the beginning of the show, to please use the tip and donations link down below with any questions that you may have during this live episode. We get a lot of questions coming in from viewers, a lot during these shows, not not just this show, but other shows around the network. So if you want to use that link down below, the tip and donations link, it's streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork/tip. Again, the link to the tip and donations is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork/tip. Again, it just makes sure that I can see your question. It pops up here on the chat to my right, and I'm able to see it, interact with you guys, and it's also a massive help for the show and the network as well. But now we can move on to the topic at hand. Tua Tagovailoa, the season that he just had, led the NFL in a lot of categories, passing yards, and led a very explosive offense. Again, ushered, if you would like to say that, helped out a lot, illustrated by Mike McDaniels and his mind, his creative mind. But yeah, Tua had a great season, the best season that he's had as a Dolphins quarterback, probably the healthiest he's been. And it all looked pretty well for the Dolphins. The only caveat is a lot of people would say that in the bigger games, other than that game against the Cowboys on Christmas, that they just folded. They didn't play up to their expectations. Tua especially didn't play well. Everyone's thinking about when it gets colder in those playoff weather months. His arm's already not great. So in those cold weather games, he just shrinks a little bit more, and you get results like you did against the Bills to end the regular season, and then again in the playoffs when they faced up against the Kansas City Chiefs. But Tua's contract stance as it lives here today is that the Dolphins picked up the fifth-year option on his contract, on his rookie contract, gave him a fully guaranteed salary of $23.17 million for the 2024 season, with no security after that next year. So this coming season is that fully guaranteed salary, and then 2025 there's no security on that. So what it's really up to the Dolphins of what they're going to do, because the quarterback market as it stands now is set at $55 million, with Joe Burrow getting that. Obviously now he's the highest paid quarterback on a average salary per year basis. I mentioned Joe Burrow. I just said Joe Burrow, so that obviously brings up other quarterbacks that were drafted along with him. Justin Herbert also got his extension at $52.65 million, and Lamar Jackson as well got his extension almost about a year. Last year, he actually got an hour before the draft. Last year's draft, standing at $52 million as well. So those three quarterbacks that I just mentioned are in the prime of their years or heading into the prime of their years, and they all got paid. They're all competing against Tua Tagovailoa, and the top four highest paid quarterbacks are in the AFC. Number 5 is Jalen Hurts at $51 million, but the top four are all in the AFC. Herbert and Burrow were drafted with Tua, just picks away from each other. So that brings up the question now: does he also get that? Does he believe he should get that because of where he was selected? The season that he just had, obviously the best of his career, led a lot of categories in the NFL. But that's the discussion, right? Does he deserve this money? And I think after doing my research and hearing what others had to say on various networks, I think that I don't think you can pay Tua up to that just because of one good year. I think those other guys have had more success in multiple consecutive years. They give you more reasons to believe in them compared to Tua because of the injury history that's followed him since college. He got hurt a lot in college, and that followed him into the league. Of course, he had that scary injury with the concussions and the skepticism, speculation around that. That's a very serious thing. You can't take risks on that, and you don't want to put limits on him and think that, oh, we're not going to give him this money because of something medical. But that's something the team has to consider when they're thinking of their long-term future, because if he's not going to stay healthy, if he's going to have these issues with just really medical, because he's from my expectation of him, from my estimation of him, he seems like a great person. He's always saying the right things. He's never in the media for some hot take that he says. He doesn't have his own podcast like most of these guys do. He's a good person, good character to have, but it's what you produce on the field that really makes the decision for you, for these organizations, for general managers that have to communicate these decisions to the players. And I just don't think Tua has done enough in his time with the Dolphins to really make them rush out to him, and offer him this contract right away. I think they're really going to take their time with this and see what kind of deal they could work out, because the second part of this discussion is how it affects the rest of the team. They have a lot of free agents heading into this offseason, and after the season they just had, you don't want to pay Tua a lot of money, basically all the money. They're already over the cap space or over the cap limit, and you don't want to put it all on Tua for him potentially to get hurt, and then you don't have a good surrounding cast around him. If anything, if you take the surrounding cast around him after the guys I'm about to name, it could put him at a higher risk of getting injured, because some of the guys that will be free agents are going to be Christian Wilkins, their star defensive lineman, Jerome Baker, their starting linebacker, Andrew Van Ginkel, the other starting linebacker, and the two most important ones for Tua or for a good quarterback are Isaiah Wynn and Robert Hunt on that offensive line. So say you pay Tua a lot of money, the contract that he negotiates and thinks that he deserves, potentially in the above 30, I would assume he could want. I wouldn't be surprised if he negotiates for that kind of money, more than 30 million. I don't think he'd push to close to those guys. I mean, would it surprise me a little bit? But I just don't think he could negotiate for himself with his agent and say that he deserves that money. I just don't see him doing that. I think he could negotiate or try to negotiate as much money as he can for more than 30, 35 million, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins rebutted that and said that you're going to have a $20 to $25 million contract, around the same as some of the guys like Geno Smith, Derek Carr, or something like that. And it's basically going to be on like a prove it deal. If you could stay healthy, if you prove it to us that you deserve more money, we could, negotiate something where you could potentially earn more than that through bonuses or something like that, incentives that they could work out in the details of this contract. But I just don't see the Dolphins really throwing it all on Tua, because of, like I mentioned, he's not. If he stayed healthy and that was just out the window, you didn't have to worry about that. You still have to think about those moments where he just didn't live up to the expectation against the bigger guys like Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, Josh Allen twice. They lost to them at home and on the road. That last one being the most crucial. It was going to determine seeding, and they lost. I know there were some players injured, but they still had a chance, and I just think they didn't capitalize on some of those moments. The Dolphins did, and there was just other games as well where it just felt like in some moments Tua either didn't make the throw or he made a wrong read, and it was just all thrown off, because he's very much like a rhythm and timing quarterback. He's very good at doing that. If everything's on time, he's very precise, very accurate with the ball. But at times, you don't get that improvisation factor that you get with Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, that they're able to use their legs, extend the plays, make magic really out of anything. You don't really get that with Tua, because athletically, to me, he's not at that level with them. And, that all plays into size, his arm and everything like that. He just doesn't have that kind of gunslinger, improvisation, magician type of quarterback style that those other guys have. And I'm not saying you can't win with someone that's not like that, but it's going to be a lot harder to do that with a guy that can't do those sort of things like Tua. Other quarterbacks around the NFL just have great rosters, but if you don't have that one piece that's not bailing you out in some instances, but isn't really the catalyst for winning, it's hard to do so. You saw with the Jets, the Steelers, the Bengals when Joe Burrow went down. Yes, some of their backups had good moments, had special moments of, magic, but there were times where it cost them. The quarterbacks didn't produce when they needed to, or they didn't create something that these other top tier quarterbacks could do, and they end up not making the playoffs, like the Bengals, or they get to the playoffs like the Browns did is another good example, and Joe Flacco the second half it just blows up in their face. So um, that's where Tua stands on his contract. That's the sort of decisions that the Dolphins have to make with Tua. They have a lot of free agents. If you want to argue that they're more valuable than Tua, that could be your opinion, but that's just the tough decisions the Dolphins, Mike McDaniels, and the whole organization has to make because they have to get the quarterback right, and they have to have a good supporting cast around them to compete with these other teams in their divisions and in the conference. So it's going to be interesting to see where that starts, where it leaves off, how long into the offseason this all goes. But that's all I have for that segment. I'm going to take the last break of this show, and on the other side of it, we're going to go into a deeper discussion about the Cowboys and Jerry Jones's comments about being all in this coming season and why I believe it lives up to all that hype, but potentially even more in the years leading up to it this following season. So that's going to be a good segment. Don't go anywhere. We're going to take our final break, and we're going to talk about that on the other side of it. So I will be right back with that topic. And we are back for the final segment of this show, of my first official live show on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Please, if you guys would remember to please like and follow the show, subscribe to it, engage with it. There's other forms of connecting to the show through social medias, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. So please feel free to engage with the show and anything I have to say. Give me your thoughts on it, and it'll just make the whole experience of the show and connecting with you guys a lot better. But that being said, we can dive into the last topic, the one that is seemingly the biggest one for me because there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to take into note, future planning for the future of the Cowboys organization. So let's dive into it. What really started this and what caught my eye on this topic was that, like most coaches, executives, Jerry Jones was at the Senior Bowl. He gave an interview to someone there about Mike McCarthy. They asked him about him, his future, what went into the decision of keeping him because a lot of people, after they saw that playoff performance, they assumed it was a foregone conclusion that, he was out of there. There was no chance Mike McCarthy was coming back after something like that. And the Cowboys really wasted no time in assuring everyone that he was going to come back, he was going to coach this coming year, really catching everyone by surprise. But the quote that he said, some of the quotes that he said that I thought were pretty interesting was one where he said, "I like the fact that he's hanging around the rim," that being Mike McCarthy, "and I like what the team has done to hang around the rim." And later on in that same quote, he said, let's don't discount hanging around the rim." But later on, he also said he acknowledged the links a few months ago to Bill Belichick coaching potentially the Cowboys. But after they confirmed that Mike McCarthy was being held on to, those kind of went away. But he jumped to the conclusion, or he jumped to Mike McCarthy's defense there, saying a lot of other coaches, he basically said a lot of other coaches can't do what he's done, hang around the playoffs, always be competing, and people shouldn't take for granted just competing, being around the playoffs, being a contender, if you want to call them that. He didn't want to discredit that, but I thought it was interesting the way he said it and the way the Steelers on the other side took it, because they're also a team that you could argue is always just hanging around, always around the playoffs. Mike Tomlin doesn't have a losing season, but they can't get it done in the playoffs, or at least they haven't in the last seasons like the Cowboys. And as even if the Steelers have made it to a conference final a lot more recent than the Cowboys, the way the Steelers talk about it, they say it's time for a change. It's time to start winning the playoffs now. This just hanging around the playoffs, being a contender doesn't suit us. We're not satisfied with that. That's how they're saying it. They're trying to make changes. They made a lot of personnel changes. They're looking again through the draft to make something happen. The rumor with Justin Fields, it looks like they're trying to make a change as soon as possible. In the similar situation like the Cowboys, they're also in the similar situation, but Jerry Jones is saying it a different way. He's saying, it's not a bad thing to hang around the rim. It's quite miraculous. It's quite good that they're always in contention, because a lot of teams don't get this luxury of always being around the playoffs, and that they should be not take it for granted, is how he was saying it. And I just thought it was interesting how probably the two most storied historic franchises like the Cowboys and the Steelers could be in a similar situation, but talk very differently about it. And say what you will about it, it's give your thoughts on it. That's just what I thought was kind of interesting, how those two teams had different opinions of the similar situation. But yeah, like I mentioned, Mike McCarthy's going to come back, coach the team. It's actually going to be his final year this coming season. So immediately, once I figured that out, I kind of got thinking. My opinion on it shifted a little bit, because I saw those quotes and then I saw that Mike McCarthy, it was his final year. So immediately you're thinking, all right, it's the guy's last year. The Cowboys, Jerry Jones is thinking, it's his last year. Let's see if there's actually some change with such a talented group of guys that he can produce, because he's done it before. Let's see. We'll give him that last year of his contract. He might be fired after that, or he might just be let go and not be signed. That's still to be seen depending on how they do. But, that kind of all made sense there, right? Who's also going to be a free agent, or who's also in the last year of the contract, is Dak Prescott. Now, like my thoughts are really churning. My mind's really going through it now, thinking Dak Prescott is set to be a free agent after this season, and his contract has a no tag clause, so they can't tag him. They can't push that decision further. It's gonna come to an end after this season. So his contract is up after this season. They're gonna need to make a decision pretty much when they have to on Mike McCarthy. So again, it all depends on how they do. If they have the same result, God forbid, worse than they have, things could get really ugly for them. But it's almost like it's a perfect scenario in some sense if you're waiting on the change, because these two guys could basically be out at the same time. If they don't produce, you could get rid of or not re-sign either of them. The coach is gone, the quarterback is gone, and you can bring in two guys. You could bring a good, I shouldn't say good coach, a more experienced, a better coach in the Cowboys' estimation that you truly believe can produce better than Mike McCarthy has. And obviously, if he's going to be handed the keys, all that responsibility to the team, building a good competitive team, you're going to imagine he wants his own quarterback. And with Dak Prescott, a new coach might not be satisfied with him. So it all kind of works out in a way, because Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy could be out the door simultaneously, depending on the results this year. And you can afford to lose those guys, because I think they've been in the limelight for the miscues and the mistakes that have led to the Cowboys' failures. Not all of them, definitely not. They're not responsible for all the issues and problems that there is with the Cowboys, but the majority of it does fall on the coach, on the quarterback, really, because they're two of the most important positions in football. So seeing that, it kind of makes the decision easier because of all the other free agents that I wanted to touch on as well. The pending free agents this year are the left tackle Tyron Smith. He's getting a bit up in age, so he might not be one that you want to bring back, but he is a free agent at the left tackle spot where it's very crucial to have a good pillar there to establish the offensive line. They're starting running back Tony Pollard is a free agent. Stephon Gilmore had a great season for them on a one-year deal. He's also a free agent. They're starting safety Jaron Kearse, defensive end Dorrance Armstrong are all unrestricted free agents this year. So those are some pretty pivotal pieces to the puzzle. You can argue that Stephon Gilmore, you could argue to let him go just because Trayvon Diggs is coming back, and that secondary has played pretty well. Jaron Kearse is one that I think was underappreciated, had a lot of good plays, plays very well coming downhill in the run game, so I think he's one that they'd want to keep. Dorrance Armstrong as well just adds to that defensive line with Michael Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. And Tony Pollard as well. The running back market and running backs in general, the theme around them is that they're underappreciated, that teams could just take one out and plug anyone in if the O-line is good. So, again, he's one that you could argue they don't really need to keep. With another one they could draft or sign in free agency, but all those guys were basically starters, and if you lose all of them, the majority of them, it's a lot worse than losing maybe one or two of them. And you could lose more of them if you want to save that money for Dak Prescott. So that's how it all kind of ties in. You know, if they already know or have an idea that they're willing to let Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy walk, they could give these guys the money now and not have to save it for a Dak Prescott and draft a quarterback or sign one on a low-end deal, and it saves them all money because next season it all ties up into this larger plan for the future of the Cowboys, because next season CeeDee Lamb and DeMarcus Lawrence will be unrestricted free agents, and I don't think you have to argue with any Cowboys fan or any fan of the NFL in general that these two guys are probably the top two, or not top two because Michael Parsons is probably top two, but CeeDee Lamb and Michael Parsons are the cornerstones, the cornerstones to this organization. They really hit on both of them through the draft, and they want to be Cowboys for life is what a lot of fans are thinking. They want those two to be Cowboys players for life the entirety of their career. So CeeDee Lamb just had a great breakout season, establishing himself as, if you want to say, definitely top 10 in my estimation. If you want to argue top 5, he's made a good case for that with the numbers that he put up, especially towards the end of the season where he had huge games against the Lions, the Dolphins, and just pretty much the later half of the season, he just went completely crazy and established himself as a top-tier bona fide wide receiver one. So you're going to think he's going to want a lot of money for the kind of performance that he put on this past season and that he could put on this coming season as well on a contract year, trying to prove himself again, potentially even more, put up better numbers with Dak Prescott. So he's one that you're going to have to sign, really, to me, unquestionably. And then DeMarcus Lawrence, he is getting up there in age, but you're not going to find a defensive end, a pass rusher to his caliber just in free agency or through the draft, just banking on a guy to produce his kind of numbers. There are pass rushers as well, like Josh Allen out there, just comes to my mind right away from the Jaguars. He's one that they could potentially invest money in, but again, he's probably going to garner a lot of money, and to pay CD, to pay all these other guys, he might be too expensive for the Cowboys, and re-signing DeMarcus Lawrence, at least on a 3-year, 2-year deal, just to buy you that time. Really look into investing in some other guys, drafting somebody better that you think could really produce in the long run. I think would serve them better than saving that money, in my estimation, for Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott, because like it all ties into what Jerry Jones says. All these scenarios that I just listed out, the free agents next offseason, this offseason, it's all banking on the results. And when Jerry Jones says all in, I really do think it has more implications than any other season, because there could be big changes to the head coach, the quarterback. Some pieces could be gone. It could look completely different with some guys in and out. And everyone knows that's watching this show and any NFL show, they always talk about it. You got to get the quarterback right. And if you get the quarterback right, it's just as important as getting the coach right. And the Cowboys could potentially be in the market for both of them at the same time. So when Jerry Jones is saying all in, if they get this wrong, um, if Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott don't produce this season, yeah, they could be out the door, but is the grass really greener on the other side? Are they going to find the two guys, the two most important positions in football to take them to the promised land as soon as they want to? Because they've been hungry for playoff wins, Super Bowl wins, not to mention that. It's going to be hard to find two of those guys just sitting there, finding them right away. You're going to have to be extremely lucky and do a lot of research and a lot of homework to find the two most vital positions in football to give you that amount of success. So this season, I just wanted to emphasize how big it really is going to be for the Cowboys, because in the long run, it could look very different. And if they think they're struggling now, if they don't get it right, it could get even worse with some of these guys. So this season has a lot of serious implications, because this team, this could be the last run for this core group of guys all being there. Because Dak's really been the centerpiece around it all. They wanted to build a team around Dak, and if he's gone, then you got to bring in a new guy with new ideas from the head coaching position. So it's all tied up, and this season's going to be huge for the Cowboys to see. It's going to be interesting to see what decisions they take and what kind of route they go to resolve these issues. But it's all going to come down to on the field product to determine this. So I just wanted to outline that, how important that was, and how significant this offseason could be for the Dallas Cowboys. But that's all the time I have for everyone here today. I want to thank everyone for joining me on this first episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Again, it was my first show. I'm very grateful for you guys for tuning in, and your engagement means a lot to not only me, to us, the network, but so please remember to subscribe, like, and comment on the show, as well as following us on any social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, for more content like this that could catch your eye and catch your guys' entertainment. So that's going to be it for me today. Join me again on Monday for more discussion and storylines around football and around the NFL. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Moradiege, saying have a good weekend and thank you for joining me.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.